I was born to a single mother. I think that at some point they thought I was going to die, so the family just left me in an alley. They tried to put me back into foster care. When I was 18, when I was still in high school, I enlisted into the Army National Guard. When I was in my 20s, I was brash and I thought I knew it all. This is part of the one thing that really irritates me. I believe the current problems we're having now in society with our young people is that we don't have the draft.
San Francisco is one of the most anti-Catholic areas in the country.
Yeah, I mean, this is where we need us. I want to go where the pagans are. Catholics, they think they have to work their way to heaven, so it's not surprising. It's like, oh yeah. But finally, it was time for me to pay up, and I went to Mass. I was completely blown away, and it changed me forever. I was saving the world. I couldn't save my soldiers, but what I could do is I could save my soldiers as a priest.
What are your thoughts on World War III? Viva Cristo Rey. Today, I have a very special guest, Mr. Cameron Song Sellers. Mr. Sellers is a retired U.S. Army colonel with over 34 years of military experience, and he's now a fifth-year seminarian for the Archdiocese of San Francisco. In this episode, we're going to talk about his struggles as a soldier, being adopted, converting from the Baptist to the Catholic faith, as well as discerning his vocation to the priesthood. So, to give you a quick bio, Sellers started out as a private in the artillery. Then he became an officer. His first deployment was to Bosnia in 2000 for peacekeeping duty. Following the 9/11 attack, he was deployed to Afghanistan and Iraq twice. Later in his career, he worked at the Pentagon, served in South Korea for 6 years, which, by the way, if you guys are listening to just the audio, he's Korean ethnically. He was adopted. Oh, and he also has 3 master's degrees in defense, security, and war strategy. He has dozens of awards, including the Legion of Merit, 2 Bronze Stars, and 4 campaign medals. I could go on, but you get the idea. This guy is very accomplished, and somehow he agreed to sit down and talk with a schmuck like me. Anyways, Mr. Sellers, how are you?
I'm doing great.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here. Well, before we begin, I wanted to briefly touch on how we met, because I think it's, I don't know, for me, it's a little bit of a funny story.
Sure.
So here at the seminary, they have a bunch of speaking events that are open to the public or just dinner events. So I remember when I was first here, I was sitting at a table, and I assumed you were a priest because you're a bit older. And I was like, who is this Asian priest who has like a fade haircut? You know, who is this guy? And it made complete sense now that you were in the Army. And ever since then, you know, you've given me a lot of life advice just in general, and I really appreciate that. And you know, you great friend to me. I'd say you're more, not really a father figure, maybe more of like a distant uncle figure. I'm half Chinese, so maybe there's some sort of like connection there. Anyway, so let's start from the beginning. So walk us through your story growing up. I understand you were born in Korea, but then you were adopted and came to the U.S.
Sure. But before I get there, I just want to say thank you for allowing me to tell my story about my vocation as well as my life. Because even though you may find it unique, it's a quintessential American story of what Americans do when they come here as immigrants. And we all have that past. So that's one. 2 is thank you for reaching out, coming here, and also coming up and talking to me, because sometimes there's a barrier with generations that they don't really want to speak to somebody who's older. So, and I also appreciate what you're doing here as is it a millennial?
Gen Z.
Gen Z.
I'm at the cutoff though. So
okay.
Yeah.
But I appreciate this opportunity to use this type of format, which I'm used to looking at but not being part of. So, but yeah, going back, just if you look at my name, you wonder what's going on. I look Asian. You know, you see my name, Cameron Sellers, and it's like, what's that all about? But then you see the middle name Song, so what's all this about? And, you know, the quick and dirty of it, and just at any point here, if you want to just ask some questions. I am adopted. I was born in Korea back in 1968, and about 2.5, I came to the United States, and I got adopted by a family. And I grew up in Arizona. Part of that, the thing my family wanted to do is to ensure that I didn't lose my Korean heritage. They kept my last name, Song, and made it my middle name. And as I get older, I start to appreciate where I was from and where that heritage, and so I like to try to preserve it as much as possible and use my middle name a lot more than I've used to, than I have in the past.
That's amazing, yes. And I don't know if this is too deep, but in one of your speeches, you mentioned like they found you in an alley or something when you were at the age of 2.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's a crazy evolution of exactly how that how that discovers. You know, there are a couple things that go on. One is that what? I was abandoned. Part of the issue with that time period is we don't know. It's hard to be factual in exactly what happens. It's been over time that I hear these stories. But my gleaning from what happened was I was born to a single mother. They think the father was white. They just assumed because it was in 1968 that it probably was an American serviceman. She gave me up. I thought at that time was adoption, but I went into foster care, and I was sick. I had issues with my liver, my hearing. I think that at some point they thought I was going to die, so the family just left me in an alley.
Oh my goodness!
And then I was discovered, and at that moment they put me in a hospital, and they tried to put me back into foster care. I went back into I think I was in an orphanage, and they took me back into the hospital. And then there was this doctor. Her name was Dr. Cho, and apparently she's still alive, and I'm still in contact with her. She was the one who discovered me and said, you know, this child needs to be adopted overseas. Wow. And so there's two ways to look at that. You deal with abandonment issues, you wonder about adoption, but I think from a Catholic perspective, what I've always found interesting, and I always thought it was providence, is that I was found on the streets on February the 11th. So that was Our Lady of Lourdes, and Our Lady of Immaculate Conception is the unofficial patroness of Korea.
Wow.
And on that day, they declared my birthday. So when people really want to ask, well, how old am I? I'm not trying to be coy. I really don't know. But yeah, I like to look at it that I was born on that day on multiple different levels. I was born, and from that moment on, it was life was a gift. And there's a way to really look at that. And I looked at that, what I learned, and you probably read in a speech, is that I realized I wasn't abandoned. I was being taken care of by God, and I also like to think I was being taken care of by His mother. And so it wasn't lost on me later in life as a Catholic that it was not a coincidence that I was found on the streets on February the 11th. That just happened to be Our Lady of Lourdes, and also the feast day for Koreans, for their country, their patroness is Our Lady of Immaculate Conception.
Wow. That's an amazing story. Wow. Thank you for sharing that. So let's go to you moving to Arizona. So you're adopted, you're growing up in Arizona. It seems like you enlisted as a private. Was that right after high school? Or let's talk about your early military journey. Yeah,
so I saw one of the questions, and it was like, why would you waste your life like that? And it's not the way I look at it, is you don't waste your life. You only waste your life if you choose you don't want to learn something from the experience you grew up. Mm-hmm. I always believe that at this moment, you are a sum of all your successes and all your failures. When I look back at that is that my dad taught me this idea of gratitude. And he also taught me that we offer something back to the country. And for me, knowing that I was adopted, they brought me here. I was living a great life in the suburbs in Phoenix. It was like, how can I give back? Mm-hmm. And so I knew I wanted to go into the military. From a very little kid, I remember, I think the movie that seeded me was the movie Midway. It was back in the 70s. And I realized just how dangerous it was. And it was something that I felt it was on my heart that I needed to give back. There was this gratitude. My dad had served in the military, so I knew I needed to do that at some point. I needed a scholarship to college, and I realized I needed money. So the best way to do that is I enlisted when I was 18, when I was still in high school, into the Army National Guard. And what was open at the time was being what they referred to as a cannon crewman, to work on the line. So I went in I enlisted as private and spent 2 years in that occupation. But it was a good experience. I look at it as a crucible moment in our lives that define who we are. So I see it as a moment that I became the person I am because I chose to make that decision at that moment when I was 18 years old.
Wow, I see. Okay. And at the time, were you a person of faith?
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't Catholic at the time. I was a very devoted, now I'd say Protestant, but at the time Christian.
Okay.
I had discovered Catholic I had studied apologetics. It wasn't at that point, it was from a Protestant perspective. You know, I'd rediscovered my faith. By then I had been baptized. And at that, before, I can't remember when it happened, but it wasn't senior in high school. I don't know if it was before I joined the military. This is how I got introduced to Catholicism. I had known a lot about Catholicism, and I didn't think that they were non-Christians. Mm-hmm. I knew there were Christians in the Catholic faith. There was just another church. But I remember I was trying to get Catholic to come to my Sunday school, and the way was, you know, you'll have it all set up. You say, hey, why don't you come to Sunday school? We got a better program. You'll love it. Mm-hmm. And I'll just go to Mass once. And I consider I consider it a trade. Yeah. The trade. And I consider it fair. I go to Mass once, and
you're briefing all your buddies. We got to talk to this guy.
And then every week you just keep coming to Sunday school. And just to show just how dumb and so far out, I remember he says, does it cost me any money? And I remember asking one of my leaders at the school, he says he wanted to know if he had to pay money to come here. And he says, well, that's, you know, Catholics, they think they have to work their way to heaven, so it's not surprising. It's like, oh, yeah. But finally, it was time for me to pay up, and I went to Mass, and I was completely blown away by the Mass, and it changed me forever. And at that moment, I saw Mass, and it was just like, I just remember asking myself, it's like, why as Baptists do we not worship this way?
Wow.
And when I walked in, it was just like the Bible was presented to me in a new way, and it just shocked me. And just kind of give you a backstory, when I came back to my faith, I just hated church. I didn't like anything about church. I found it extremely boring. But I just figured, okay, I really love you, Jesus. I don't like church, but I'll just deal with it. Mm-hmm. But I didn't realize there was a different dimension of church until I walked into that Catholic church, and I was really excited about it. And I remember at high school I said, you won't believe I went to a Catholic church. You guys are all Catholic. It was amazing. And they were all looking at me as like, what are you, on drugs? And then it was like, excuse me, what church did you go to? And I said, well, I went to Christ the King. And they're like, how in the world can you be excited about that? Mm-hmm. It's like the most boring church in the whole Archdiocese, in the whole diocese. It was like, really? So at that point I knew God had spoken to me. Wow. Because why would I be in the most boring parish and have this amazing experience?
Right.
And so I spent the next 3 years just secretly, privately going to Mass because I just found it very fulfilling. It was the way it was supposed to be expressed. Mm-hmm. But at the time I didn't know the theology. I just knew there was this experience that really moved me.
Later, it seems like you started investigating Catholicism in high school and when you were enlisted in the Army or in the National Guard. So later in your military career, you went to officer training school?
I did. What happened is I ended up getting an ROTC scholarship to go to Wheaton College, which was then, it likes to bill itself, and probably is, the leading evangelical Protestant school in the country. Wow. It was a great experience. I love that college. Mm-hmm. But I went there and I realized there's this nagging thing. At the same time, what was going on when I was in the Army, but I was also church hopping. Mm-hmm. I was trying to figure out. I like what I saw in the Catholic Church, but I didn't really want to be Catholic. I just not sure if I understood this whole Mary thing, faith and works. What does that really mean? All the normal tropes that you think about, what always goes on with Protestants about the Catholic Church, you know, I was held captive to, and it took me a long time to realize Catholicism was a different language, and Protestantism was a different language, and I had a hard time fitting Catholicism in my Protestant worldview because I'd grown up in it my whole life. Mm-hmm. But I realized that God was telling me something, you need to be here. Mm. And so in my junior year in college, I decided this would be my second time I went through RCIA. I ended up getting confirmed when I was at Wheaton College in the Diocese of Joliet. And so that was a big leap for me. It was one of those things that you realize that it's really the grace of God. Because I tend to be a rational guy. I like to look at evidence before I get there. I remember a priest once told me, he said, that was really weird that you had the grace to be able to make that leap forward, even though you weren't convinced of what you thought in your head. Mm-hmm. And at the time, I also realized at that point, faith is a gift. And that when God gives it to us, we have a choice to either exercise it or put it to the side. And at that moment in my life, I have no idea what was going on in my head at the time, but I just knew this was the right decision. Wow. And it started to, over time, what you start to realize over your life, all those pieces start to make sense as you look backwards.
Mm-hmm. So during your conversion, one of my questions was, did you have a specific aha moment? It seems like when you went to that first Catholic Mass at Christ the King and you saw the beauty of the Mass, especially like the liturgy of the Word, that was sort of your moment? Would you say there was one singular moment?
That Mass was the aha moment.
Wow.
And it wasn't necessarily liturgy of the Word, it was the Eucharist. I was just not used to seeing communion done as part of the service.
Did you take communion?
I did.
Oh, okay. Dang.
Because my friend didn't. My friend didn't tell me. I didn't know at the. At the time when you do that stuff, you just don't. At that moment, at that time, I just thought communion was communion.
Right.
And my friend who was Catholic, he wasn't catechized enough to tell me.
That's fair.
Yeah, he wasn't catechized enough to tell me no.
I hate to say it, but it's a very common problem that happens.
It is, and I'll be honest with you, the laxity of way Mass was done back in the 80s in a lot of these parishes made you think that there wasn't nothing special other than you had a service. It wasn't later that you really, when I saw the TLM, or even the Episcopal Church has a lot more structure to their services. It looks a lot less Protestant, and you start to realize, okay, there's something else going on here that I didn't know.
Right. So in the Catholic world, we have many beliefs that may seem alien to Protestants, such as Mary, indulgences, purgatory, the Pope. Of all these topics, was there a specific topic that you struggled the most when converting to Catholicism?
Well, let me put it this way. The only doctrine I didn't struggle with was communion of saints. That was it. Everything else, I was a Protestant thinking of all of this stuff, and it took me a long time to understand what all this meant. And I would argue now, looking back at it, that Protestants are always going to have issues with this stuff, with these doctrines of the Catholic Church, because one, it's a different language. Two, we don't have a philosophical framework, and we don't have an anthropological framework to fully understand why all this matters. It's like, if you grew up as a nominalist, or if you grew up as somebody who God just will things and he can do what he wants, then none of this makes any sense. And so when a Catholic comes up and says, well, we do this because it's logical, it's like, okay, who cares about form, matter, and potency, right?
Right.
And act. All that what does that even mean? And second, if you think that the Bible is it, and God says you're a woman and you're a man, that's all I need, and that's the argument. What happens when somebody says, well, that scripture of the Bible you're reading is not true?
Right.
What? But you have to have a philosophical understanding of the anthropology of what that means. And if you don't have that, all of this other stuff just doesn't make sense. So like even when I'd hear the word fittingness, I didn't really understand what that meant. But if you have that philosophy and the anthropology, fittingness makes complete sense of how this theology works. So the theology starts to make a lot more sense, and also you start to have a lot more confidence in Scripture that what you're reading is true, and it is the inspired Word of God.
Wow!
So the irony of it was Bible, 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 Bible. You don't really appreciate the Bible unless it's within the heart of the Catholic Church.
Right. Because I found a lot of Protestants are like, oh, we just follow the Bible. but it's a lot of times it's up to your personal exegesis or interpretation.
Right.
So okay. So right now in your story, you're at Wheaton College. You're a newly minted officer. I would assume you're also Catholic. Okay. So going into the Army as an officer, I'd imagine you have way more challenges, a lot more responsibility. So how did your faith come in there? Did Jesus help you face, any danger or specific struggles as a soldier?
Well, I mean, I think faith, probably the question, let's take a step back. Let's go to basic training. What you learn in basic training is everybody's religious on Sundays, because if you go to religious service, you didn't have to work. Second, in war, when when there's always this prospect of death over the horizon, there's no atheist. It is true that there is no atheist in a foxhole. That was like a saying that I always heard growing up, and in many ways that it is true. So you got to figure it out, because it's weird as an existential moment just how quickly you can die and that's it.
Right.
So you have to assume that there's something bigger beyond you, especially if you're going to do this whole sacrifice thing. So yes, you learn that, and what you learn in basic training is you learn to follow. Looking back at it now, you just don't realize, especially now dealing with today's culture, following is really hard. But even back when I was in my culture, or even if you talk about your grandfathers, your great-grandfathers, everybody wants to be the boss. Nobody wants to be the follower. But the problem is, you're never going to be a really good leader unless you're a good follower. Now, just listen to what I said. I said, you can't be a good leader if you're not a good follower. I didn't say you can't be a good boss without being a follower. Because the difference between being a boss and a leader is a leader has certain traits that he understands his purpose. He's willing to sacrifice. He's willing to make those hard decisions. He's willing to build consensus and govern. Sometimes we get confused, and the reason why I want to become a priest is because I want to do good works and be a social justice warrior. Or I want to be a priest because I look at the priest now and how he says Mass is terrible, and I'm just going to do it better. Or I want to be a priest because I can really give the homilies. And what they're not really understanding is, okay, part of being a priest is you have to be a shepherd. What? And it's, you don't get to dictate what your Mass is going to be. You don't get to dictate. As a leader, you learn to build consensus. You learn to govern. You learn to sacrifice. You learn to make hard decisions. So if you're struggling with making a hard decision, you don't want to make a decision, but you're all about saying the Mass, you have to really question your calling.
Right.
But as a leader in the Army, it's the same thing. You have to ask yourself, why am I doing this? Can I be that leader? And another thing that the Army teaches that's really rooted into our Christian ethos is that now you need to be a servant leader. You need to be, are you willing to sacrifice? And how do you do that? You gotta, three things. You got to be disciplined, you got to do your duty, and you got to love your soldiers.
Wow.
And the same principles apply when you think about becoming a priest or anything in life. Is that, are you disciplined? Are you willing to do your duty? And do you love the people you're leading? Because a lot of people, if you don't love parishioners, if you don't love engaging with them, you're going to be in a world of hurt.
Even
being a parish,
Susan on the parish council?
priest, sitting on the parish council.
Yeah.
You have to look at them, and you have to say, I love you. And then you have to also take it back, and the chances is that most of them are going to hate you. And you still have to say, I love you anyway.
Right. Yeah. Pope Francis said the priests should be so close to their flock, they should smell like the flock.
Sure.
So, yeah.
No, I understood what he said, because in the military we have the same thing. You eat last. You sleep outside with your troops.
Wow.
You do that. You learn to love your troops. You learn to govern. And I can tell you now is that if you don't love your troops and if you don't love your parishioners, discipline it can maybe be part of you for like 40 years. Duty's only going to last you a certain limited time, probably 20 years. Wow. It's usually what I see that gets them, and they finally just fall away. So if you look at people who have always been religious about going to Mass, but they're cultural Catholics, and one day they're just not going anymore, and they don't know why they're not going. But if you're not catechized, it's hard to keep those two parts of it, discipline and duty, unless you have a love for it. And in anything we do, we always have to pray to God and ask for a conversion of what I'm doing out of discipline and out of duty, that I can learn to love what I'm doing. And it can be the most mundane things, like I hate taking out the trash. I hate making my bed. I hate getting up early in the morning. You do it out of discipline, you do it out of duty, but at some point you're going to have a conversion. So all these different doctrines, all these things I believe in the Army, is because I had a personal conversion in those incidences.
Wow. So it seems like they really went hand in hand. Your faith helped you as a soldier, and the discipline you learned in the military helped you now discerning the priesthood too.
Sure.
So there's a lot of overlap.
There's tons of overlap, and it's hard to say what come first sometimes. You never know. God doesn't work in a linear line. We like to think it does. You never know. And as I always tell people, you can have multiple motives for the same thing. So you can have this as a reason and this as a reason. There's nothing wrong when you have 6 reasons why you're doing something. Like a lot of times I hear, it doesn't matter how you got here. It's just, what are you going to move on? So you're here because you're wanting to date Susie. Okay, you want to date Susie. But what are you going to do from here when you're moving on? It's like anything. Why are you here in the Army? Well, I wanted to be an officer. Why? Because I didn't want to work. Okay, that's why you're here. So what are you going to do now? When you know it's not that anymore.
Right. I see.
Yeah.
Okay. So moving on, the next topic, do you have any advice for young soldiers today? So let's say they're in the military. How can they sanctify their work to God? Kind of like the Opus Dei mindset, right?
Sure.
Do you have any advice for them?
I'll take it from 2 perspectives. I think General Mattis, when he was here, I'm not sure if you were here when he spoke.
Or McMaster?
No, General Mattis.
No, I wasn't.
He was a Marine Corps general. Okay. He made a really good line, and I think it needs to resonate because it is really true. He said, I didn't understand what boot camp was all about until 9 years after the fact. And if you do the math, he was a captain.
Wow.
And so he said it took him as a captain 9 years later to realize how important basic boot camp was.
Wow.
Right? And then Jose Maria Escriva, founder of Opus Dei, unbelievable saint. If you never read his story, you should read his story. But he was always about, we do everything about sanctifying our work. And the Catholic Church has been very good about that whatever we do, the mundane things in life, we sanctify. You see it with St. Teresa of Lisieux, and she talks about the little things in life. And then, but even in the prayers of prayers of the Mass, like in the offertory prayers, we offer these things that we made with our human hands: the bread, the wheat, the wine that we grew. And what it's telling us is that everything we do is always should be for the sanctification of God. And if you really think about the message of Jesus, what he says, what he required to do, we love Jesus, but how do we express that? We love our neighbor. And how do we really express it? By helping with the mundane things.
I see.
The very mundane. The things, it's just not about the big things we do. Like, here's my $10,000 check, right? That's not what God's talking about. It's when you are willing to get up out of your chair and open up the door for a woman or a lady who's struggling to get in, or a lady with kids, and the first thing you do, you're on a bus, you're on a subway, and the first thing you do is you get out of your seat and you offer that chair to her.
Wow.
Those are the mundane things we sanctify unto God.
I see. Okay. So do you have any practical tips for military members to grow in their faith while in the military, besides, I would assume, going to Sunday Mass?
Well, I always tell guys in the military, it's like, look, what are you learning in the Army is the same thing you apply to your spiritual life, but your spiritual life is going to save your soul. So there are reasons why we do things in the Army, in the discipline. It isn't just because it's out of necessity, but if you study Aristotle, what does he say? What does Socrates and what do the ancients say about it? Work, discipline, purify, sacrifice, right? These are all the same elements that we've all learned. But what they're doing is they're helping us at a metaphysical level, that there's something that helped us with our soul. And then, if you can believe in a soul, at that point in your thing, then you apply it to the revealed God, what God has revealed to us about us as highly morphic creatures, body and soul. And so what we do every day in life, that discipline is what's going to get you through the most difficult times of your life. Wow. And why the military is so successful, the U.S. military is successful in battle, is because we train really hard. Learning to sanctify are the little things in life. And really what we need to learn is appreciate the mundane. Because we all want to think that we can do the big things in life, but what I've learned is you're not going to be able to do the big things if you can't do the small things. And what do I mean by the mundane? Is learning to sanctify everything you do every day is get up and make your bed, clean your room, take out the trash, open up the door. It's the little things that you do for people, that discipline that will pay off later on in life when you have to make the big decisions. Rarely have I seen somebody who can stand up at the moment when you really need it. That's why we call it a miracle. It's like I've never seen somebody do this. I mean, how is the world that you can do that?
Right.
And what you learn in the military is exercise, practice in many ways does make perfect. Or I always like to say, practice ensures minimizing the mistakes. And if you really see why the Army does so well in war is because we practice. We spend billions of dollars on training. But what I find today, I forget when I come into the civilian world, is a lot of people don't want to practice. They just think they already know how to do it. And so they don't see a reason. Then when things fall apart, then they're like, well, they just want to say, they want to blame luck on why it works or doesn't work. And really it's because we just chose not to practice.
I see.
Yeah, let me just go back and give you an example.
Yes.
Let's look at the Ukraine war. Why are the Russians doing so badly? Are the Ukrainians better? Yeah, maybe. But the Russians don't practice. They don't train. They're all caught up in graft, on corruption. And so President Putin thought his army was ready to go. And then he started realizing my guys weren't really doing what they were supposed to do.
Right. They're sending North Korean soldiers now, right?
Right. And North Koreans are brought up in graft and corruption. They don't train. They don't have money. And how are they doing? And what was it that story with H.R. McMaster's when he fought the battle of 73 Easting?
Right.
Those guys, he didn't tell you how much training they did in the Fulda Gap, but the Army set up this thing called the National Training Center for those guys. And for light infantry, they set up the Joint Readiness Training Center in Louisiana. And those guys fight brigade-size level tank battles. And I'm not sure for you, do you know what the success rate of Army units going through that against the opposing forces?
I'm guessing it's pretty low.
Yeah, it's like one out of every 30 engagements.
What?
You're lucky. You're considered to be successful if a brigade, a U.S. Army brigade going through there, can win 1 out of 10 engagements, 20 engagements. And one of the reasons why is because the opposing forces, they engage something like 11 times a year. They work together as a team.
Wow.
So if you're with each other and you're working together and you're practicing, you're just going to be better at it.
I see.
If you're coming in and you haven't really trained that well, or if you're having guys come in and out, and you're not used to working as a team, it's gonna show in your engagements.
I see.
But what the soldiers learned from that was, okay, this was high pressure, this was extremely hard. But when they actually did engagement, the enemy was nothing like the opposing forces that they ran into at NTC. And a lot of the soldiers coming back from the Gulf, in the first Gulf War, would talk about how easy it was to fight the Iraqis than it was to fight the opposing forces at the National Training Center. So that's what you want. You want your practices to be hard, so the real thing isn't hard.
Wow.
And it's hard when people don't want to practice. And if it's not part of your culture to practice, it's even harder.
So being prepared.
It's always prepared. You have to have prep time. When you go to your parish, how much prep time do people do?
Right.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
Oh, I'll just leave it up to the Holy Spirit.
Come 15 minutes early and a little rehearsal.
Rehearse it,
you come
or
5 minutes late, you get 10 minutes.
Yeah, it's like, well, the Holy Spirit, if He wants it to go right, the Holy Spirit will intervene.
Yes.
You know, it's like we forget that, you know, God wants us to participate. And part of participation is doing the little things.
I see.
So, and also, you know, too, one thing that the Catholic Church, and let's just move over to the morality of it all, the moral compass, the Catholic Church that teaches us how to conduct ourselves, you have to be rooted in that. Because being rational and being emotional is a fine line in those type of situation. And you never want to go over that line and do something emotional that you're going to regret for the rest of your life. I used to always tell my troops, don't do anything now that you're going to be sorry for the rest of your life, because the rest of your life is a long time.
Wow. Right.
And I remember reading, this is why reading's always good. I was reading an oral account of, I'm not sure if you ever saw the movie The Pacific.
No.
So if you have a chance, you should read The Pacific. But it's based on a book by Sludge about his experience in World War II. I remember reading an oral account of his in which he had been brought up in the Bible Belt. He believed he was a God-fearing man. But the grind of the war was so bad that he watched other guys do these. The things they would do is they would dig gold teeth out of dead Japanese. And he had started to lose his humanity to that point, but he was about to do it. And this doc, or maybe a dentist, but he said, hey, you don't need to do that. He said, why not? And he said, everybody else, he said, look, Sledge, it's unhealthy. You don't want to get diseases. But Sledge would later account what he was really doing, what that doctor was doing was trying to save his humanity. That don't cross this line because you'll never forgive yourself when you do it.
Wow.
And that's something that we all have to take as soldiers when we go. And is that unfortunately a lot of soldiers cross that line, and that's why they have all these issues. It's it's tough enough when you do things right. It's even harder when you cross that line. So as a soldier, your faith, you need to be so well versed in your faith and disciplined in your faith that you run into those situations. That kicks on the same way when you're bodybuilding and you see those free weights. The first thing you do, you know what to do. You don't have to think about it and get the posture right, make sure everything's safe. You just know it. It's just like second nature. Something that used to take 10 minutes takes 1 minute. And it's the same thing. You want a reaction in your own mind that you're going to do ethical things even when you're not thinking about doing ethical things.
Right, because the government can try to legislate morality as hard as it can, but at the end of the day, I'm sure we all find ourselves in morally gray situations where that's where your faith comes in. Right,
because unfortunately, life is not a textbook. It's not right or wrong. Sometimes you do, and those are the easy decisions. But if you even think about Ignatius and his spirituality, he says that discerning a spirit isn't about a good and a bad. It's between two goods. And the thing that we're going to face most in our life is we're going to face things that are good, and it's option A is just as good as option B, but maybe a little bit better. And sometimes we want to turn that into a black and white, good versus evil thing.
I see. So on that topic of morally gray areas, so St. Thomas Aquinas talks about just war theory and how nations can sort of justify waging war. I think it's because of primarily self-defense against other nations. So my question is, was there ever a time in your service, sort of two questions, was there ever a time in your service where your faith made you question a command? And based off that, it almost sounds like the U.S. military, the government is very complex. We're involved in so many different locations worldwide. So let's say, I'm sure you have tons of different missions. Do you have to do a full-on moral analysis of every situation? Like, we're going to shoot a bomb at these guys. Well, I have to ask the chaplain. I have to read the history. Is this morally okay? Should Catholic soldiers do that?
Yeah, this is part of the one thing that really irritates me about what's going on now, especially here in the Bay Area. We're so disconnected from the military. We've developed these weird ideas of what they do. I don't know how many times I've had to tell people, Americans don't carpet bomb. They don't carpet bomb civilians. They may carpet bomb a military target, but they go through so much to make sure that civilians are protected. And they'll be glib over at UC Berkeley, Stanford, these places, USF, and they'll make it sound like, oh, U.S. soldiers should just go out there and just kill people. Americans are different. U.S. soldiers are different because we're enculturated. And you can say that about Western Europe. We're enculturated with the just war doctrine that it defines us. If we have an incident and it's premeditated, it's not because the command did it. And when people get off and say, well, look at how many people died, what they don't look is the processing we went through. And we don't look at what the enemy's doing too, because they know we follow the just war theory, and they don't have to. So what do? I'm going to build my command bunker under a hospital. I know the Americans aren't going to drop a bomb on a school, so I'll put my troops in a school. I mean, Muslims do it to each other. They put their troops in mosques. Mosques aren't sacrosanct to them, but they'll be the first ones to throw it at us and say, you can't attack a mosque. And it's like, I remember when they told us you can't attack a Ramadan. It was like, you guys don't stop wars on Ramadan. Why would we? And so, you have to be careful. And it's because people don't know their history, right? What did Orwell say, attributed to Stalin? If you want to control your future, you got to control the present so you can control the past.
I see.
And that way you control your future.
Yes.
And what I mean by that is, what I didn't tell you in that is I became a civil affairs officer. A civil affairs officer epitomizes the just war theory. Our job is to take care of those who are innocent, those who are civilians on the battlefield, to make sure they're not targets. So we go through a long, tedious process of target selection.
I see.
What targets we pull off. If we have an issue, we won't do it. And that's why it's kind of irritating when you hear these people talk about what's going on in the Gaza war. It's like the Israelis do the same steps of target selection, making sure they follow the Western culture of just war theory. It's just when you got an enemy who's willing to hide in their people, tell the people, don't run, you're going to stay here with us, then you're going to, inevitably, you're just going to have casualties.
Yes.
And, but the Geneva Convention, when you think about the Geneva Convention, the Hague Protocols, you go all the way back to the Scott rule, going all the way back to the Mexican-American War. It's all based on the just war theory.
I see. And I'd like to say as a point of distinction, because I know the comments are going to go crazy, when you said Muslims, I'm assuming you're referring to like the extremists in the Middle East and not Muslims in the Western world that are a little bit more...
yeah, you always have to be careful. No, I'm not talking about the everyday cultural Muslim. I'm not even talking about devout Muslims. I'm talking about the ones who've been extremely radicalized, who are on the far, far fringes. Okay,
cool. So, twofold question. Would you recommend people to join the military today? Because you were in it, you first joined a few decades ago. Many people the past few decades have say it's changed, it's very woke. Would you still recommend a young person today who's looking, they're not sure if they want to go to college or not, to join the military?
Well, I guess we have to wait a few months to see if it's going to be woke anymore.
Great. There you go.
This is what I grew up in the all-volunteer Army, and I grew up during the Cold War and the military. My time in the Army now, 34 years later, and this is a very minority opinion, very minority opinion. I believe part of the current problems we're having now in society with our young people is that we don't have the draft. Wow. It's at multiple levels. There's multiple issues that are going on that I would say you can contribute to the draft. It's politically unsafe for a politician to get up and say, I'm for the draft, and not thinking that he may lose the next election. I mean, the whole idea that we're having this debate about loan forgiveness of education is terrible. It's a terrible state of what we think of our young people and how we understand entitlement versus gratitude. Not once in this whole debate did we ever talk about, well, you know what, maybe all you guys that have $100,000 in debt, if you want to join the military for 4 years, then your debt gets forgiven. No, it's let's just forgive their debt. Instead of, why don't we teach because one thing I have noticed, I've seen in statistics that young people really want to give. They have this desire to give, which makes sense because the only way we as human beings can operate it is we're in a giving state. But what is being confused, we're not telling them how they can give. We're telling them, oh, you need to go save the environment. You need to go help poor people. You need to go do this, which is all great. But the giving and the giving of sacrifice for your country, the things that is tangible like the military, where you're going to be in those positions,
right?
That the being in the Army will always make you a better person. Some people will say, well, that's not necessarily true. I would always argue those coming in probably weren't supposed to be coming in the military because they had psychological issues.
I see.
But I would tell people now, it's like, yeah, you need to join. What did I say earlier about what Matt has said? I didn't know as a captain how good boot camp was. In the same way, if you talk to the World War II generation, those who got drafted, how many of them would have never voluntarily joined the Army? But they're so glad they got drafted and they changed their life for them.
I'm gonna have to push back on you a little.
Sure.
So I think a draft in many ways would be very bad. I say this as a Gen Z young man who lives in California, simply for the reason that I think our generation is so unpatriotic. You see burning the flags. A lot of young people, I think, in this country are very just neutral, ambivalent, aloof, or some people just straight up hate their country. So I think instituting a draft might be bad because then we're just legally forcing all of these people who kind of already dislike the country a little bit because they don't know how privileged and spoiled they are to live in the best nation on earth.
Sure.
So
my answer,
we have to fix the root issue, the cultural patriotism issue before
my response to that is, how did they get there to begin with? Did they get indoctrinated in school? So what do we always say? Look at the other side, right? So how is it that if you push them in the military because they've been told not to be in the military, and then they get a different point of view, right?
I see.
Yeah, so sometimes, and the reason why you won't hear it from that side, and they will be against it, because they don't want them learning all that stuff in the military, because they know they're going to learn it from the military.
Interesting.
So what's the best thing they always say? Oh, they need to join NGOs. What about the Peace Corps? You know, they always come up with alternatives, like the National Service, back when it was first being instituted, looked at in 1992, 94. It was unbelievable how many Democratic NGOs they said, these people can sign up and be part of this. They don't need to go in the military. The whole point of all this was the military, especially those are exactly the reason why they should be going into the military. I have multiple reasons why there should be a draft, but they're exactly the reason why they need to be in the military, because they automatically get Fox News
so
in
we
the
just
military.
have too many soy boy Gen Z. Just put them in the military, straighten them out.
Well, it'd be amazing what a crucible can do to people, right?
Wow. Yeah.
There's
You're
a reason
smiling,
why,
looking at me as you say the draft, so I'm kind of sweating, guys. You know.
No, I'm not worried about you.
Okay.
But there's multiple other reasons at multiple levels why a draft would be good. But that was one is that we just don't know when we're 18 what we really want to do. And a lot of times we don't want to do what is right for us.
I was an idiot when I was 18.
Yeah, I was like, I want to eat Cheerios.
Right.
I want to eat Fruit Loops.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Let me go to McDonald's and have that preservative hamburger and not eat well, right?
Yes. So another question about the military that's kind of a problem that I found. Actually, Father Gary Thomas brought this up when General McMaster gave a talk. So in 2017, the U.S. Army added pagan, Wiccan, and Druid and heathen classifications to its religious codes. In 2011, the Air Force Academy spent $80,000 for this outdoor worship center for earth-based religions. So what are your thoughts on this? Because on one hand, freedom of religion, it's in the Constitution, but also a lot of these are contradictory to the Catholic
Is freedom
faith.
of religion in the Constitution?
Or in the Bill of Rights.
Is it in the Bill of Rights?
It's the amendment, right? Freedom of
No, I
speech.
bring that up because it's something we always say, but what does the Constitution really say? It says we will not have an established religion.
I see. Well, freedom of speech, I guess.
Freedom of speech. Yeah, I mean, there's something, the reason why we disestablished the churches, like Virginia used to have the Church of England as their, or the Episcopal Church was the official religion, was they said that the state has no business being in religion. I don't think anybody can make this argument that religion is supposed to be out of the public sphere. So what does that all mean? the chaplain corps in the military is always going to be a reflection of the cultural milieu norms of what they come from in the civilian population. Mm-hmm. So if the civilian population is pushing, or the political leadership is pushing this stuff, the Army's going to comply. Mm-hmm. So I know when Father Gary Thomas brought that question up, but the answer was what General H.R. McMaster said, mm-hmm. is like, if you don't want that in your military, then you got to elect politicians who won't allow that to be in your military.
I see.
So I'll be kind of curious
mm-hmm.
with what they're going to go, and all of a sudden how much of this is going to end. Mm-hmm. Because, and there's a difference. I think when you grew up in a secular culture of 30 years ago, even we're growing up, we thought all religions were the same. Every religion is the same.
Right.
We weren't willing to, and what we weren't willing to do is separate Christianity from cultural Christianity. Mm-hmm. Hold on, we'll let this ring. So, what do I mean by that? When we look at Buddhists, when we look at Hindu, when we look at Islam, we don't see a religion, we see a culture. Mm-hmm. So let me give you this example. I was reading this article of what happened in Massachusetts. The school went completely apoplectic because they were going to have a Bible or some Christian symbol in the school. Separation of church and state. But the same school had no problem allowing their kids to go to a mosque. Mm-hmm. And the school just dressed it up as, it's just culture. But it was like, wait a minute, Muslim evangelizes the same way as Christians. How is it that the same? Oh, no. The imam's not going to try to convert anybody.
Right.
And they talk to him, I want everybody to be Muslim.
Right.
And so there's this secular understanding mm-hmm. where we get this idea that we are willing to put everything together. Mm-hmm. And what we need to better do as a secularist, but we can't do it, it's only religious people who really know how to do it, is know that there's a difference between religion and cultural religion, mm-hmm. and there is a variety of different levels. And it's really funny, who seems to figure this out are some pretty good hardcore atheists, or those who are atheists have figured out, it's like, look, I don't believe in Christianity, but I know cultural Christianity is by far better and superior than any other culture.
I see. Proof is in the pudding.
Even
if we just pretend for Christianity to be true.
So I think what we need to do in American society,
no, we should, yeah.
And what we should do is make that distinction, what is culturally Christian that we love, and that I am not going to be a believer of Christian theology.
I see.
And that's how you can get through all this, what you see in the military with the rise of Wiccan and all these other stuff. Mm-hmm. You can easily say that stuff is outside the purview of Christian culture. Or you can easily make it says, how are all these guys getting credentialed? Mm-hmm. Oh, they're not. Mm-hmm. Okay, they don't get it because they're not credentialed.
Right. I see. Okay. So shifting topics slightly, talk politics. As I would assume, as a U.S. Army colonel, or as you were higher ranked, the president is the commander-in-chief of the executive branch. So did you notice a big difference in, your experience in the military under a Democrat versus a Republican administration? Or how did that go? Or did it not reach your level per se? Is that more of the general level? Or did you experience any sort of changes between?
There's a complex answer to that. Mm-hmm. There's some shades and nuances to that question, but yeah, there was definitely a difference when you had a president, a Republican president, and a Democratic president. Mm-hmm. Now, depending on what shoes I was in, I could tell you whether it was positive or negative. Mm-hmm. But I can tell you this. It's funny because I was working with a British officer and some Koreans, and we noticed how our allegiances were different. Like the British officer, he pledges his allegiance to defend the king and the queen.
Right.
American officers are pledged to defend the Constitution. Mm-hmm. And so in the military is always taught that we're not the top dogs. We are not the top. We execute policy. This is the reason why it was an irritating question for people who don't understand subjugation of the military to the politics. It's like, we didn't like his answer because, hey, you're a general, how come he doesn't change it? Mm-hmm. Oh, by Constitution, it's the political masters who tell us what to do. Our job is to defend the Constitution. Wow. So when everybody starts running around yelling, the democracy is going to end, mm-hmm. all I can say about what happened on January 6th, what did General Milley do and not do? He wasn't going to call out the troops because his allegiance wasn't to the president. It was to the Constitution.
I see. So it's sort of a different dynamic of a king and a queen versus just an idea almost.
Right.
A piece of paper.
And that idea is so ingrained and enculturated. There's a reason why when you're private, you got, you know who's the top dog in that rank? You got a private all the way up to a general. You know who the top dog is?
The president?
No, the civilian. There's a reason why, there is a reason why privates have to call every civilian, yes ma'am, yes sir. They address all males as sirs, every lady as a ma'am, because they understand that they're subjugated to the civilians. It's the way we reinforce this idea that we're at the service to our political masters.
Wow. I see.
So if that's being taught to you as a private, imagine what you're being taught as a second lieutenant.
Right.
Imagine what you're being taught in all these fancy degrees I have. Like at each level, you take an oath. When I take an oath, I'm always defending the Constitution. When I'm at the Army War College, guess what I'm learning? I'm learning how Congress works, how the president works, because I answer to them.
Wow, yes. I was talking to a young man at West Point. He's training to be in the Army. And he said, yeah, it's easy. He was a big Republican. It's easy to call him, the libs, Kamala, blah, blah, blah. But he was like, as a U.S. Army officer, when you see Kamala, she's not just some random person. She's the Vice President of the United States. You say Vice President Kamala Harris.
Yeah.
So there's a different level treating your superiors.
The Army has a better sense of, or the military has a better sense of separating politics. There's a long tradition in the U.S. Army. I suspect it ran across a lot of the military services all the way up until even into the 70s. Officers didn't vote.
Wow.
Because
were they not allowed, or they?
No, they didn't want to. They wanted to show their neutrality in politics.
Wow.
That we don't get involved in. I had a boss. He didn't vote for the first time until he retired from the Army. Because he just wanted to make sure, and that wasn't just the officers. He was a colonel, but I knew an E6. She wouldn't vote in any of the elections until she got out of the military because she didn't see. She wanted to. For her, it was to reinforce the notion that my job is to serve everybody.
Would you recommend that? Would you vote? Would you recommend service members to vote?
It depends. It depends on people.
Okay.
So, I would say, if you're over hyperly political, and I would tell the guy, look, you need to step back and probably not vote for a while until you can get used to this milieu that you defend everybody. That everybody, it doesn't matter what type of American he is, you defend him. And there'd be other people that's like, look, you got a family, you got a wife, you need to vote in your local elections because that has an impact. So you can actually, it's not about voting or not voting. It's sometimes you can say at the national level, I'm not voting. I'm going to vote in my local school board elections. I'm going to vote in my parish for the whatever, if they have a council. But there's multiple ways. And it's like what I was telling you about, there's shades of gray when you have different, what shoes I'm wearing. So I can tell you right now that usually I'm going to get paid very well if I have a Republican president. But if I'm a civil affairs officer, Republican presidents always tend to screw me. And so it is not my best efforts as a civil affairs officer. I always seem to do better under Democratic presidents. When I was in when I was in Korea, I did better under Democratic presidents, not Republican presidents. I think we pretty much
hashed out the military.
We blew whatever format we were going to do. We blew out any format.
Sorry.
So at this point, it's any questions.
Holy Spirit,
just any questions you want to ask on behalf of your friends or yourself.
Okay, so I want to move more into your discernment. So you graduate college, you're an Army officer. How do you go to the priesthood? How do you discern that? What's the story behind that? Well,
the discernment, for me, for a long time, it was, I didn't think I had a calling to the priesthood, or I wasn't listening to God. But sometimes it's not about, did God call you when you're young? It's sometimes you have to be ready. So I always argue that he was looking at me later in life because I had a lot to learn. Like, had I come into the priesthood in my 20s, I'd probably been a very rebellious priest. I probably wouldn't even be a priest today. Wow. So you let part of calling or your vocation is listening to God when it happens. And for me, when it came, I was trying to figure out, do I want to be married or not married? But one thing I started to notice when I was at Our Lady of Peace in Santa Clara, I was stationed at Moffett Field. I was in a reserve unit at the time as the operator, so I was the full-time guy. So I was the active duty guy serving in a reserve unit. So I would go down, and what I witnessed was that priests were healing people in these in the parishes, yeah. And here's a weird thing: like when soldiers who are active duty come in, they kind of know what they're signing up for. Reservists don't. And the weird thing about civil affairs is 85% of it was in the reserves, and they were the ones who were being deployed a lot. They were being called back. So if you ever look at the records of civil affairs people on their deployments, they exceed a lot of other MOSs.
Wow.
Even more than infantrymen. And a lot of them were coming back broken.
Wow.
A lot of them were having issues just because of war.
Right.
And the amount of money, the amount of money that we're spending, it wasn't helping. And what I was witnessing at Our Lady of Peace, the priests were healing these people through the sacrament of reconciliation and the Mass. And it wasn't until later on I realized there's a difference. What our government wants us to do, or what I get a lot of time what our medical establishment wants to do, is they want us to forget things. They're all about trying to block our memory of bad things. What the Catholic Church does is heals us. They don't ask us to reject the experiences we went through. They help us cope, and they help us heal from that experience. And what I noticed is that the healing of the sacraments themselves heal us. And I watched all these people, and I was looking, and I said, I just remember asking God, I was like, here I am, I'm single. I would like to get married, but what are you asking me to do? And those doors were opening up, and I started to realize at that point that I still love service, but I wanted to heal His people. Wow. Like I was saving the world, but I couldn't save my soldiers as a soldier. But what I could do is I could save my soldiers as a priest.
Wow.
So, but that was, to get to that point required a lot of experience in the real world, and it required a lot of learning to get to that I wouldn't have had, because when I was in my 20s, I was brash and I thought I knew it all. One thing I realized when I was a major, I had a lot of experience and I still thought I was a know-it-all. It wasn't until that I became a lieutenant colonel or colonel, I realized I don't know anything. Wow. As you get older, you realize this is bigger than myself. And so I think God was telling me, it's now right. And even with that discernment, you also start to realize that discernment doesn't mean drop everything and do it now. You have to be really attentive to what God's calling you, because it was another 10 years.
Right, it's a big decision.
Yeah, another 10 years before I got there, and I just had to be patient and be listening to what God had to say. I learned a lot more. Like I think you and I talked about this. My last 8 years of my military career, I learned more in that 8 years to prepare for the priesthood than I would have had I dropped out then.
Wow.
So, God can work with you, but you have to be willing to put the effort in. There is something to be about. You got to be obedient to your spiritual advisor. You got to be obedient to the church, and there's something to that. There's a stages to that. You're obedient, and Ignatius talks about it. You're obedient creates humility. Humility creates sacrifice. Sacrifice, humility. Obedience produces love. And so there is a reason why we go through that and why we have to be that. And I always talk about people as like, you can't love somebody if you're going to be disobedient. That's just too hard. And it doesn't even work. But people think they can. Like, I love my, but I'm not going to do all this.
Right. So during your military experience, were you dating at all? Or was that
I dated.
Just kind of never really...
Well, there's a couple things that there was 3 things why I didn't date as much as I should have. One was the deployments. I just didn't know whether or not I was going to... I used that as an excuse, probably not to get married, but it was there's a practical reason for that. Second, I wasn't psychologically ready to date. There was a lot of issues I was dealing with.
Okay.
Then third, I got caught up in swing dancing. And it was like, I like swing dancing.
Right.
And there was a lot of women who were okay with swing dancing, but they didn't really want me swing dancing.
Oh, okay.
And it was like, you know what? I don't feel like I want to give up my swing dancing for this short term, for this. What do we really think it is?
Mm-hmm.
And so, but I think swing dancing was a part of that process leading me into the discernment.
I see.
It's like, it goes back to what we always say.
Mm-hmm.
Hold on, we'll let this ring.
Mm-hmm.
What I always say, you're a sum of your experiences.
Mm.
And what I always tell people is, don't regret what you did.
Mm-hmm.
Just learn from it and move forward.
Mm.
So, even to this day, it's been like this for like 10, 15 years now. It's like, I wouldn't change a day of my life.
Wow.
Because I wouldn't be where I'm at in my relationship with God and with the world if I didn't have all those experiences.
Wow.
And one of the things I think it's really extremely hard to tell young people who are in the school environment most of their life, it is okay to fail. Failing the first time is hard, but failing requires resilience. If you can learn resilience, you're going to develop the theological virtue of hope. And when you have that,
mm-hmm.
you're never going to be in despair.
I see.
And and it just makes you better because you realize I can go do other things.
Mm-hmm. That sort of answers my next question. What's it like to be a lay vocation? It seems like through all of these experiences, God used you to perhaps minister as a priest, if you end up being one, in many ways that other priests probably wouldn't have that experience, and also for yourself, for formation.
Yeah, I mean, I would argue with people, it's like, look, don't have regrets. Could God have used me as a priest when I was 20? Mm-hmm. Yeah, it would have been extremely, extremely hard. And I would probably have to go through some conversion experience coming up to the priesthood.
Miracle, yeah.
The miracle to get to where I am now. Mm-hmm. But what I'm learning now is I understand my experience. I need to know what I need to learn. Mm-hmm. Like back then, I probably said, when they wanted to send me to St. John the 23rd for 4 years, back then I said, as soon as I can be a priest, the better.
Right.
But as you got older, it's like, no, thank you. I mean, I'm glad you have a lot of faith in me to send me to John the 20th, but I need to get my theology, I need to get my philosophy down. Mm. And out of that, I realized I needed anthropology. Mm-hmm. So now walking out, I feel I have a better understanding of my theology based on those two other disciplines, that I can go into the parish life and really understand how to integrate that and make that applicable. Mm-hmm. Because sometimes it's hard to take esoteric academic ideas and get it down to without making any sense to them.
I see. So obviously you had a very successful career in the military. I've heard rumors you were in the talks to even go to the general level. How did your coworkers and superiors react when you decided to leave the Army to pursue the priesthood?
One thing I never got was a negative reaction.
Really?
Now, I never got a negative reaction, and that's part of your discernment, because people who are not believers can tell, they can still sense there's something special about you.
Wow!
It doesn't matter what it was. The funniest one is that and it wasn't that she was negatively against my vocation. She just didn't. She was a Protestant, so she had no idea. She was like, "Oh, that's wonderful. You want to be a priest? We better get you married." That is the closest to a negative response I've ever heard of.
Okay.
Even that
Episcopalians, no married.
I remember this general. He says, "I want you to put your name in list to become a general officer." And I said, "No." And he said, "Why not?" I said, "Well, I'm thinking about becoming a priest." He says, "Wow, okay, I can't compete against God." And but he sent an envoy 2 months later saying, "You need to change your mind and become." And it's like, no, I've made my mind, and it was a nice honor, but I wasn't going to. But even though they wanted me to put my packet in and do that stuff, it was just like there was practical issues of why this was going to be what it is. But people around me, they know whether or not you have that vocation. They may not be able to articulate it, but they'll get a gun. And that's why I always say when you're in your parishes, they're the ones who are going to tell you whether or not you have a vocation.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Wow.
They will tell you. That's why you always listen to outside counsel. They will let you know.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So my next question, what's the best way to go about talking the faith to Protestants, maybe Baptists, or just someone who's maybe anti-Catholic or doesn't know much about it? Do you have any tips?
Yeah, I think, but you hear this from everybody. You hear it from a lot from Trent Horn, Matt Pratt, everybody. Don't talk about your faith with them at the beginning. Unless they're asking this is what I've learned in their life. Unless they ask my opinion, I don't give it.
Wow.
Right? It's their life. But what I can do, what I can do is I can love them. I can be friends with them. I had some of the most amazing theological conversation in the swing dancing scene that all got started because they saw my life differently than everybody else, and they were interested in it. I remember one, she didn't believe in God, and she says, I want you to pray. I said, really? It's like, you don't even like prayer. He says, yeah, but I like it the way you do it.
What?
So the way you live your life.
That's a sign from God, yeah.
Yeah, so the way, if you allow
God's just knocking on your door.
If you allow God to work through you, He can work through you.
Wow.
So, the one thing you learn about Thomas is sacramental causality. There's something to be said about causality that if you're willing to be an instrument to God, God can use you in any situation. And what you start to learn is the genuineness comes from how you live. And so what I've learned is I need to work on my life. I don't need to convert somebody. If they come to me and say, why is it that your life is different? Then we can have that conversation. I remember probably the guy who got me to become a colonel. He was chief of staff of 8th Army and later gone on to become a Department of the Army civilian, and he had this job of transformation in Korea. And I remember we were talking because he wanted to know, I knew how to get money. So he was asking me, how do you get this money? And finally he says, you know what, I know you're adopted and you're Korean and American. He said, how do you get above the culture? Because his wife was Korean, he had kids who were both. And I said, well, that was easy, Catholicism. He goes, what? And I talked about what it meant to be a Catholic, and that how Catholicism raises you above nationalities, ethnic groups, because now I become a child of God, and child of God has no nationalities.
Wow.
In Christ, there's no Jew, no Gentile in Christ.
Right.
And he looked at me like, he was like, I have never heard an answer like that. He said, I really have to think about this. I would have never guessed. But it moved him. It moved him to the point, so these conversations, that's how you have to be always ready to give a defense for your faith. It isn't being, I got to know Aquinas, I got to listen to Catholic Answers every week to have that answer to be. A lot of times, your everyday life is going to require. So here's a story that I always like to tell. How did I end up at St. Patrick's? I remember that there's this general, and when he found out I was going to become a priest, he says, look, if you ever want to talk, come and talk to me. And he said, I just want to let you know, I haven't been in Mass in 20 years, maybe 30 years. I'm a lapsed Catholic, I get it. But if you want to talk about it, come and talk to me. So when I was struggling with should I discern for the Diocese of San Jose or San Francisco, when I got back to Korea, I called him up. I said, sir, do you mind if we meet? And he said, sure. And he blocked out 2 hours with me. And I explained everything to this guy. Everything.
Right.
And he said, well, it sounds like to me you need to go to San Francisco. I was like, what? He's like, how did you get to that? He says, I listened to everything you had to tell me. Everything. I don't know what's going on, but I can tell you what you just told me.
Wow.
Your seminary experience is going to make you the priest that you're going to be. So you need to be in San Francisco.
That's the Holy Spirit.
It was, the Holy Spirit works for people. And to this day, he's always checking on me, wanting to see how it's going. But these are the moments of evangelization, how you talk to non-Catholics or people that fall away Catholics. They see you by who you are, and it's genuine. So if you're doing the discipline, the duty, and you have a love, it shines. And people want to know, what is it? And they'll have that, they'll like, out of the blue ask you, why you guys do this? Why do you guys do that? And so I'm in constant dialogue with all sorts of different people from multiple different backgrounds. And it's not because I get in front of them and says, let's have a debate. It's always, they're always curious because it was like, you seem like an authentic guy. What's this?
I remember you said you're an Army guy too. You want to be in the action, in the real battle. California, San Francisco is one of the most anti-Catholic areas in the country. So.
Yeah, I mean, this is where we need us. This is where the vineyard starts. And we shouldn't concede territory.
I see.
Right? And say, well,
San Francisco, St. Francis, right?
Yeah, St. Francis. Like someone says, why would you not go of all the dioceses, why not go to a diocese that's a lot better Catholic and say, why do I want to go there? I want to go. I want to go where the pagans are.
Right.
The thing that brought me to San Francisco was I remember reading an article, and the most unhappy young people in the country was in Silicon Valley.
I see. Wow. Okay.
Go ahead.
Couple more questions, and then we'll wrap it up.
Sure.
What elements of the Baptist tradition can Catholics learn from, or which stuck with you? They're still valuable today.
Well, I think what always take because this question would always come up when I was younger. Where did we go wrong? Where did we go wrong that you would go on and become a Catholic? And my answer to him is, you did nothing wrong. You made me so biblically literate. I understood the Bible I knew the stories, the Bible, everything about the Bible from a layman point of view, that when I went into Mass, I saw it.
Wow.
I saw it.
Wow.
It was because you made me biblical literate that when I went to Mass, I saw it. And it's one of the reasons.
Like a runway.
Yeah, it was just like for Catholics who never got biblically literate, they didn't understand what the Mass was. So you could have those two contradictory perceptions going on at the same time for the same event. And one thing that was different was I knew the Bible better than they did.
Wow.
And I always tell the Baptists is you don't do anything wrong. There's nothing wrong with growing up Protestant. Then there isn't what I call inherently bad stuff in Protestant. What it is, it's a lack thereof. Right?
I see.
Protestantism is only going to take you to a certain point. And if you want to go any further, you're going to find it in the Catholic Church.
I see.
And so for me, it wasn't about right or wrong. It was the fullness of the truth was always going to be in the Catholic Church.
I see.
And that's what the Baptist Church did, was they prepared me for the entrance into the Catholic Church.
Wow. I see. So last sort of serious question. Throughout this whole process, military, discernment, what's one thing God has revealed to you in discovering your vocation to be a priest? Patience. But what God is really, here's the thing that God really loves. I mean, no pun intended, but it's the love of God that is most important to your vocations. If you love somebody, you want him, and he's on the verge of deciding, I'm going to find out whether or not he says, I want you as one of my lieutenants. And if that's a big thing. It's like when a general says, I want you to be part of my staff. Or when the general says, I want you to be a general. That's a pretty big deal. But even better is that if I know God loves me, and that his love for me, that love that he loves for me, is instilled in me to give to others. And that's what the story of vocations is about. I see.
Vocations is always going to be about listening to God, called obedience. And what do you learn from that? Humility. You learn sacrifice. And your output is love.
Wow. I see. Okay. So 3 sort of miscellaneous fun questions. So the first one is actually a little bit kind of serious, I guess. So you're a retired U.S. Army colonel, over 34 years of military experience, multiple master's degrees, defense, security, war strategy. What are your thoughts on World War III? We see tons of escalations worldwide, Taiwan, the Middle East, Ukraine. Do you think something's going to happen in the next few years? I'm just thankful to be in a state of grace. That's what I'm trying to do.
If a true historian knows that you never know when the World War breaks out. Good historians don't know when World War II started.
Wow.
Like when Germany invaded Poland, now people then go, oh, Second World War started. And some argue that the war started when the Japanese invaded Manchuria in 1933. Or it started when they invaded Shanghai in China in 1937. Or some would say World War II was finishing up World War I.
Wow.
So when we use these terms, World War III, do we really know what that means?
I see.
Right?
Right.
Now everybody, this is just my take. This is just my opinion on all of this. Like the whole thing has been my opinion. But here's the deal. You know what the longest war the United States fought?
The War on Terror?
No.
The Cold War?
No.
I don't know.
Indian pacification.
Indian pacification?
Yeah.
Wow.
Pacifying the West.
Wow.
That was the longest war we had.
Really?
But we don't think like that.
Wow.
You know what the second longest war we were in?
The 12 Years War? I don't know.
No, the Philippines. 1901 to 1946.
I didn't even know we went to war with the Philippines.
We didn't go. See, that's the point. It's like when we talk about long war, what are we even talking about?
Right.
There used to be in the old days, we would define war by Congress declaring war, right?
Right.
Congress doesn't declare war anymore. They authorize military operations. We haven't had a declared war since World War II.
Wow.
Because it opens up all sorts of other things going on.
Right.
So when we talk about the long war in Afghanistan, which started in 2001 and left when we left in 2021, that's a long war, but it's no different than the banana wars we fought for 20 years in Latin America. And if you think about the pacification campaigns that we fought. And so if you're willing to look at I didn't get a degree, but it was still part of my curriculum in national security studies was civil military relations. And you start to realize the United States has been at war with the world, or in the world, since its founding. We just pretend that we're not at war.
Wow. So a lot of like proxy stuff I've seen going on.
Oh, yeah, proxy wars. And in really, a peacetime, we're fighting information wars, the shadow wars, right?
Information wars here.
Yeah,
exactly
shadow
right.
wars, all that is being
bots,
fought. Yeah.
Okay, lighter topic. I've seen in your Instagram bio in these cups, I always hear this Catholic gentleman. What is that, and what does it mean to be a Catholic gentleman?
Well, first of all, I always like to think the conduct of a gentleman always comes from being Catholic.
Really?
So the things that we learned was steeped in Judeo-Christian. How do we treat people? And the gentleman always knows he's at service to the other gender, to the other sex. And the reason why we do this, not because they are weaker, is because that it's a reminder to us that we're always at service to others.
Wow.
So sometimes I'll open up a door for a lady and says, I can do that. And I said, well, it's not about you being able to do it. I got to learn to be at service. Oh, really? Take my coat. So for us, we should always, being a gentleman should always be a sign that it's a sign to love our neighbor.
I see.
Right.
Well put.
And for Catholic gentlemen, it was started by a club. This is like the first generation of the mug, but I loved it so much. And my mantra is, our job is to make Catholic gentlemen redundant. Meaning that when people hear gentleman, they think Catholic, and Catholic, they think gentleman. And I think we've really lost this art. And it's really, I always tell guys, it's like, it's not that hard to do. Just open up the door. Instead, I get a lot of whining and complaining. Oh, there you are, being a gentleman again. And you're all making us look, you're all making us look bad. It's like, you don't have to look bad, just go open up the door.
Right, there you go. Okay, last question. I know you're not a priest yet, but I have a little confession. So I was snooping around on your Instagram, and I found anime. Are you a connoisseur of the anime world?
No, actually I'm not.
Oh, nah.
Sorry.
I thought you were going to give this long story about how you love anime.
I wish.
Stuff.
No, that anime was drawn based on a picture. It was my friend's birthday in Freedom Plaza, and we were doing this swing dance called the Collegiate Shag. And I showed that picture to this Korean artist. I said, any way you can do an anime?
Oh, wow.
And he did it. And I just use that. And the reason why I do that a lot, I use that as my thing because so many people are stealing identity and things like that on Instagram that if you don't see this, then it's not me. Right? It's become my trademark. If you don't see this, it's not me.
I see.
So you should know. If somebody claiming to me who's not this anime character asking you for money.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. And it's like it's a pretty good defense for a lot of things.
It's like a watermark.
Yeah, it's like a watermark. But I also love anime. There's something about very Asian about it that you can identify with Asian culture with it.
It's grown on me a little bit. I used to hate it.
Yeah, I mean, because you look at it and you go, well, it's not really, you don't put it in the same category as realism, right?
Right.
But there's something very special about why that tune. I wish I understood why anime is so popular in Japan and Korea.
I feel like when I watch anime, it elicits like an emotion out of me, or sort of like a nostalgia that I would never get out of a Western film or a Western media piece. So
yeah, it could be for both of us because you're half Chinese, right?
Yes.
And so there's something that tugs at our that part of our culture.
Right.
And it's something to easily identify with. You don't have to explain. Like somebody looks at it and they know Asia.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
I love Pokemon. That's probably the main anime I watch.
Yeah. Well, it really does have. It's really funny. My friend, he was visiting me in Korea, and he was watching all the like. Korea would have these public service announcements. Was a hodgepodge between anime and Pokemon of these animal characters doing dumb things. Says, don't do this. This is what's going to happen. Yeah.
No waifus though.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Well, that pretty much wraps up all the questions that I have. Thank you so much for being on the show. I really appreciate it. And it's been an honor to get to know you more the past few months. So thank you so much, Mr. Sellers.
Sure. And if there's any other questions that pop up you want me to try to answer,
I see.
We can do that as well.
Awesome.
I appreciate this opportunity to share my vocation story. So hopefully other people, especially if you're a young single man, either to go into the military or go into the priesthood. But most of all, we should all be pursuing holiness, a relationship with God.
Yes. Well, guys, thank you so much for watching. Please pray for us. You know, this production, there's a lot of struggles you guys don't see behind the scenes. And, you know, I don't ask for money or sell anything on this channel. It's entirely self-funded. So the only thing I ask for is that y'all keep us in your prayers. You guys already know we're praying for you. And God bless. Awesome. Thank you.
Hey, thank you.